Hey, all right, so for those of you who did not watch my last video, in a nutshell, there's some pretty serious red flags popping up with my General Assembly Coding Bootcamp experience. 30% of my cohort has dropped the class, and the majority of people who are still in the class are quite a ways behind, like a month and a half behind, an entire module essentially. Since week one, our TA has not participated at all in the instruction. He has had no input to give people, and he has not done his job, straight up. He hasn't done his job. He hasn't been there for lectures. He's been logged in, but MIA when he's called upon. So you fill in the blanks on what he might be doing when he's logged in, pretending to be an instructor, but he hasn't been there. Since week one, he has not participated in our course. He's helped with some basic command line stuff, pulled me into another room once to help me with some stuff. But since then, that was day one. Since then, he has been not attending. In a coding bootcamp with live instruction, there's some expectations of the students and of the instructors. The bare minimum in GA's particular situation is that you have to have your camera on. This has not been the case with the instructional assistant. He hasn't had his camera on in class since the second day, and for almost all of the classes, he's been a complete ghost. Several times our instructor has called on him for him to not even respond, so he's just not at his computer. To be frank, it's quite clear that he's getting paid to log into Zoom and then do whatever he wants during the time that the instruction is happening. This is obviously extremely frustrating because every student in the class is paying $16,000 to attend this cohort, and the instruction is not good. Especially for the reason that I covered in my last video and that I mentioned at the top of this one, most students are behind and need the help that an IA of any sufficient quality could provide to those students falling behind. We left Module 1, the front end side of the General Assembly Bootcamp learning coding extravaganza experience, and the majority of students don't even know how to properly write a function in JavaScript. Seriously, I mean, half the class should be in a separate room with a TA most of the time covering these basic topics, but that has not happened one bit. He's also had office hours every week, as the IAs and lead instructors do, and he hasn't shown up for a large amount of those office hours. Students will just show up to them, ready to ask questions, and he simply won't log on and start the Zoom meeting. So this is obviously a huge problem of gross incompetence or lack of effort. And yeah, so I mean, what did we do about it? Well, unfortunately, the story doesn't get much better because there wasn't a clear way to pursue this and actually file a complaint against the TA. Most of the students haven't brought this up as an issue, either because they're more agreeable or they just simply don't care to bring it up. But it's really been bugging myself and another student. So we both reached out individually to our student success person. This did not do much for us. He basically just told us to wait it out and see how things developed, see if he got any better, and he did not in any way. When we followed up with him on this issue, we reached back out to him and tried to set up a meeting, and we did all of this with really little success. So how did we get to the bottom of this? Well, there was a really clear and efficient way to get to somebody above our student success manager. Just kidding. It was through a super frustrating technical workaround that honestly just came to me by chance. On Module 1 project day, when people were presenting their front-end projects for that particular module, somebody who I didn't recognize hopped into the Zoom call for about 5 minutes to essentially spectate, it seemed, the one of the presentations, and then she hopped out. So that piqued my curiosity. So I went to LinkedIn, looked her up. Her account was private. I couldn't reach her, but she did have a link to a website in one of her bio things on LinkedIn. So I navigated to that. Turned out it was her personal portfolio. At the bottom of her portfolio was an email tag with a broken link, so it wasn't working. So what I did is I right-clicked on the browser page, hit inspect, inspected that particular element, and found nested in that her hard-coded email address. There you go. There was my super efficient way of contacting somebody who could actually help us. So I sent her an email and finally got a meeting scheduled with her, our student success manager, myself, and another one of my colleagues. And look at that, our student success manager was finally willing to hop on a call with us. It's funny how responsive people get when you get their upper management involved. That meeting was relatively unproductive. We aired out our frustrations as objectively and non-emotionally as we possibly could, and emphasized that while it was frustrating for us, people who were performing relatively well in the cohort, it was especially frustrating to know that the students that were falling behind were not getting the necessary help that they needed to catch up with us and be productive members of the cohort. They said again the same thing that they said before, which was that they would have a serious talk with the instructional assistant and we would see if things improved over the next 2 weeks. The next day, our instructional assistant gave a minor note for the first time in weeks on the instructor's lecture. So he had a small paragraph of insight essentially to add to the instructional lead's curriculum. And that was all we heard of him from then on out. It was clear he was still feeling the fear or something, the pressure of the meeting that he had with those 2 employees, and wanted to give the impression that he was participating. But that's all we heard from him. Now, when these things start happening, I honestly can be a little bit petty. So what I started doing is documenting every single time he participated in the class, whether or not he had his camera on during the lectures, whether he gave any insight during the lecture itself, and just generally how he was participating in the cohort. So without further ado, please enjoy this short breakdown of all of the times that he participated in the class. On day 1, he gave a quick clarifying question to the instructional lead to kind of elaborate on what exactly he was talking about. On day 2, he left 2 comments in the chat pointing us to resources relevant to the lead instructor's lecture. On this day, he actually also went above and beyond and came into a breakout room to help a couple of the students out, including myself. He turned his camera on and everything. It was beautiful. It seemed like he was starting to turn around. On day 5, however, he signed out of the Zoom meeting about 2 hours after the instruction started. The lead instructor was not informed that he would be leaving, and he never signed back on that day. Nothing happened for 4 days, and then on day 9, just like every other day, he logged in and did not say anything the entire time. This was also the second day in a row that our instructor gave us an hour off in addition to our lunch break in the middle of class to read an article or look further into what we were learning about instead of lecturing us on what we were supposed to be learning about. And to top things off, at the end of this day, the TA chimed in for a couple of minutes. Honestly, it was impressive, to help the instructor find out why jeans are blue. Yeah. Our instructor got a little sidetracked and decided it would be a good idea to try to figure out what the origin of jeans being blue were. And the TA was very enthusiastic to find us multiple articles, which I'll leave the screenshots of his comments in this video. It's quite funny that this was his literally the largest contribution he made during this 2-week time period in terms of like inputting text content. You can't make this up. And that is literally it. That is all the TA contributed during that 2-week time frame. So I had documented this and I was very prepared for our second meeting. And what happened there? Well, first off, the instruction manager did not show up. Apparently she had something that was more important than listening to our concerns and seeing our objective evidence that there was no help being given by the TA when we had scheduled this meeting 2 weeks in advance. So no reschedule, she just didn't show up. She must have had a real emergency not to reschedule with us. She didn't give us anything else to kind of go with onto why she wasn't showing up. So we were just left to assume what is probably accurate, which is that we're a small cohort and it doesn't really make a huge difference what the outcome of our cohort is. Honestly, if it didn't already come through in my dialogue here, I'm getting a little bit soured by this experience. I have started to separate learning to code with the bootcamp experience in general in my head, which I think is good for anybody, whether or not you're having a good experience, because if I were to assume that this is what learning to code is like, I would be very frustrated by the entire experience of learning to code in general. But I feel like this is turning south very quickly, and I certainly don't want to stop learning. I will note, while I'm having a frustrating experience, it does seem like this is a kind of novel experience. Either that or people just don't talk about the bad experiences very often, because this is a really unique and weird experience. They've replaced the TA. The new guy is helpful enough. He's much more helpful, in fact. So if that counts for anything, that has been sort of taken care of. But the tone of the entire cohort has started to take a turn. Students are frustrated and don't feel attended to by the past TA or the lead instructor. And as for me, I need to start thinking about my place in this experience as well. Group projects are coming up. I feel pretty good about them, but I don't want to be in a position where I'm pulling the weight of everybody else in my group, and most people are either skating by or just don't have the skills to keep up and contribute to the project itself. I don't know. Honestly, I may be withdrawing from the cohort soon, or at least moving to another cohort. But either way, I'll keep you updated.